Hi, and welcome to the Ionic in 30 webinar. We're going to cover everything that you may need to know about Ionic in roughly 30 minutes or less. But at any point during this, you feel like you've missed something or you just want to go back and watch another section for reference, don't worry, we're going to be sharing the recording of this afterwards. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to use the little Q&A toolbar down below. Add your questions to the queue, and we'll try to get through them at the end of this session. So let's go and introduce your host today, and that is me. But that is not a very friendly face right there, so let's update this photo real quick. Much better. So my name is Mike Hartington. I am the Director of Developer Relations here at Ionic. All that means is that I try to make sure that developers are happy and successful while building Ionic apps. So if there's anything that I can do to help you along your way, please reach out and let me know. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, GitHub, all with the same handle of M Hartington. Let me know your questions, what are your pain points, and potentially what are some future topics that you're interested in hearing in these webinars. I'd love to see what we can do for our community. But let's dive into the meat of this presentation and kind of understand what is Ionic. Now, you might be familiar with Ionic, reason why you signed up here, but maybe you want to share this with a friend, or maybe you want to explain what we do to somebody who's not familiar. Well, in a nutshell, Ionic is a platform for building amazing mobile apps with the power of web technology. We offer you some core building blocks, our Ionic framework, to help you structure your app and build out the UI in a way that feels familiar to web developers. We provide a native platform so that way you can deploy those apps and access native device features right from JavaScript capacitor. And in doing so, we provide a unified CLI that can adapt to the various front end frameworks of today and have you building your apps and then deploying them all from a very streamlined interface, our Ionic CLI. Along the way, if you feel like you need some extra help or extra features, we have some additional services that you can opt into as well. We have a collection of plugins and components for things like authentication, security, that a lot of people use for very sensitive apps. And then a mobile CI/CD platform that is tailor-made for mobile apps specifically, and not just your generalized CI/CD platform. So you can go ahead, have your apps be pre-built, all from a Git commit, and then go ahead and deploy those to get a native binary or have a live update to be deployed to your users, all from our CI/CD platform. And if you're a larger enterprise and you feel like you need a little bit more help, a little bit more of assistance along the way, we have an enterprise support offering that you can take advantage of to help you get along that last little bit of development that you're working on, and maybe you're stuck with something. We can be there to help you figure out your problems and get you over the finish line. Now, Ionic, you might be aware of it, like I said. Maybe you aren't sure how widely it's used or what the impact of Ionic is. Really, we're pretty impactful. We are in the top 10% of apps out there in iOS. So 10% of the App Store in iOS is using Ionic in some degree. And about 15% of the Android apps out there are using Ionic as well. So if you think about the size of the App Store and how much they are growing every single year, this is a huge percentage. Ionic is powering all these apps, and people are very successful. Now, Ionic itself is split up internally roughly about 4 different pillars, right? We have this build, secure, connect, and deliver kind of mentality, but really we can think of it as our open source platforms and then our enterprise offerings for customers. Now, we're going to focus on the open source side of things because this is probably where people are going to be spending most of their time getting familiar with Ionic and getting familiar with the ecosystem. So let's dive into this. Now, if we think about the traditional development process, we probably have a project scope, comes down, and then gets split up amongst the different development teams, right? Your iOS dev team is going to be working in Swift, Xcode, and dealing with the iOS ecosystem. You'll have your native Android team that's going to be working with Java or Kotlin inside of Android Studio. Then you'll have your web team, trusty HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and they're going to be working with their various editors that they are familiar with, and then maybe a desktop team as well, which can be using a whole different set of tools. This is the typical development process that most people are probably going to be familiar with. Now, there's a lot of downsides to this approach, right? Each team is going to be siloed from one another. So as features get built out and different aspects are added to their apps, you're going to lose some feature parity across the product suite. So your iOS team might be able to add a new feature and your Android team might not be able to do that, as in the feature doesn't exist on the platform or they're just not sure how to do that. Same can go for the web and for the desktop. You're going to have code that is duplicated across all these platforms, basically throwing in a lot of time and money to develop an app multiple times. Really not a great process. Now, with Ionic, we try to simplify this entire process by giving you one streamlined flow of project scope, development team, and then having multiple outputs for the product. So your web development team can be using Ionic and Ionic's open source technologies, and they can develop an iOS app, an Android app, a mobile website, or even a desktop web app, all with the same code base, all with the same access to native features. Just write once, run anywhere. It really is that simple these days. So we have this SDK, but really it's divided into the app UI, the core native runtime, and then the underlying technologies there. This is where you can get this whole write once, run anywhere, and we like to call this web native, where the approach is you're building out your app using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That way your UI and your interactions are all happening using web technologies. When you need to go down and actually access native device features, we're going to provide those through JavaScript, so everything feels right at home for a web developer. And then when you need to go ahead and access, say, a native device feature, and maybe it's something that we don't support or it's something that's brand new, we should be able to give you hooks into that, so that way you could write the Swift code or write the Java and Kotlin code if you need to. Most likely you won't, though. So let's dive into that open source SDK and understand the building blocks here. So starting off, we have Ionic Framework. Now, this is packed with over 100 different components that you can use inside of your app. Everything starting off from the basic building blocks, what we call atoms, your little notification widgets, your buttons, your range sliders, toggles, checkbox, you name it, we have it. These components can be built up together with multiple other components to create something like a molecule component. We think about a card. A card is a very simple concept, but it is made up of a lot of little pieces. So we have a card image, card header, subtitle, what have you. These components can all be composed together to create much more complex UI element, and it's all done through web technology. They're mobile ready first, and so they're able to adapt to the smallest form factor and the least screen real estate, and then be able to adapt to the larger screens as the space becomes available. And what's key about these components is that they have this really nice adaptive design. So the design itself can not only adjust to the platform. So right now, if we're on iOS, it's going to look like iOS. And if we're on Android, it's going to look like an Android app. But they can also be completely customized to fit your own UI and design theme. Every app should have its own branding and its own design. And to do this, we provide a collection of CSS variables that you can tweak inside of your app to completely retheme how the app looks and feels inside of your project. Really, really awesome stuff. Now, once you have that app built out, you're going to want to access these native device features. And to do that, we have that project capacitor. Capacitor allows you to take your web app, deploy it to a native iOS runtime or a native Android runtime, and then access those native device features through JavaScript. We provide a collection of plugins or packages that will allow you to target, say, the file system, camera, or Bluetooth. And once you have that installed into your project, you now have access to those features and can go ahead and start to call them all through your TypeScript or JavaScript. Now, we have this split off into two different collections of packages or plugins. Official ones that we maintain, which include all of the what we consider core native functionality, geolocation, notifications, push notifications, what have you. And then there is a collection of community plugins that you can use for things that maybe don't make sense to exist in core, for things like Stripe payments or things like sign in with Apple. Various different plugins that you can use, and you can find it on the Capacitor community or anywhere on npm. You can use any of these plugins regardless of your knowledge of native technologies. So really, you can find a plugin, install it, and start calling these APIs without really having any knowledge of how the native technologies work. You really just need to know how JavaScript works. That's great. And then to kind of piece everything together and provide a very streamlined process, like I said, we have the Ionic CLI. Now the CLI is going to be something that everyone will use and can give you a project to get started with, or can build your project if you've already created one. So to get started, you can install the CLI with npm install-g at Ionic CLI, and then you can go ahead and start a brand new project. Now it could be an Angular, a React, or a Vue project. We'll go over all of those. And then you can pick from a bunch of different templates, things like a tabs-based interface, a side menu, or just a blank starter to get up and running. Once you have that project created, you can CD into it, open up your favorite editor, and then run Ionic Serve, and you're off to the races. This really simplifies the whole entire process of how you actually go ahead and build out a project and get that native access. So we're going to stop here real quick, and we're going to look at a demo. We're going to start to build out our project. We're going to be using some rich text editing. We're going to be using a file system API. We're going to be doing it from your favorite framework of choice. And then all of this is going to be deployed to not only iOS, but also to Android. So let's get over to my terminal and start right now. All right, so I'm here in my terminal, and we're going to first verify that we have the Ionic CLI installed. We can do this by running Ionic Vue and then double checking the version output. If there's a new version, be sure to install that. And if you don't have the CLI installed at all, you can always just run npm install-g at Ionic CLI, and then that will give you the latest version of the CLI. With everything set up, let's start a new project by running Ionic start, and then we're going to get prompted to see if we want to use the app creation wizard. For this case, I'm going to say no. And then we're going to go ahead and pick our framework of choice. For this one, we have Angular, React, and Vue, and we're going to select Vue in this case. Now, any good app has its name, and we are going to pass in just a random name for our demo purposes. I'm going to use temp Vue, and then we're going to pick our own starter template that we want to use. We have a tabs base for a simple tabbed interface, a side menu with a little swipe out draw, and then a blank one, which is just an empty route and a component. Perfect starting point for our demo here. So we're going to pick blank, and we're going to let that download and install all the dependencies it needs. With all of our dependencies installed, let's cd into our project directory and open up our editor. Now, if we're to check out the file structure, we have a fairly typical Vue CLI project. We have our source directory with our main entry point, where we're going through. We're bootstrapping a new Vue app, and then we are importing Ionic Vue from the package at Ionic Vue. We also have the core CSS dependencies that Ionic needs, and then some optional CSS utilities that you can think of like a Tailwind Lite. From here, we then go ahead and bootstrap the new app. We say view, use Ionic Vue, pass in the router, and then we mount the app to our root app element. And then we have our app.view, which is setting up all of the necessary structure for our entire app. So this is going to include this Ion app component, which acts as a starting point for all of the Ionic components, and also as a boundary for all of our CSS. And then this Ion router outlet component, which is going to basically take over the job of the Vue router and provide the routing logic that we need, but also have the transitions and animations that people are used to seeing from a mobile app. To see the routing logic that we're actually using here, we can open up this router directory and then open up the index.ts. We are importing the create router and then create web history function from Ionic Vue router, which is actually wrapping the Vue router package itself. Like I said, just providing those animations and transitions that we have created. Everything else from here is pretty standard Vue router setup. So we have our array of routes where we can have our redirects and then actually route to a specific component. And then we create the router instance by passing in the history and then our routes array right in line. So all of this should feel pretty familiar if you've used Vue and Vue router before. Now, as we have it set up inside of our router config, we are loading up the base path, and that's going to redirect to home. And then home is going to load up this homepage component. So we can view that in the views directory and then open up homepage.view. And then we can see our structure for this component. Now, it uses this page component as our base layout. It has a header and a toolbar as well as a title. While all of this does sound pretty self-descriptive, it's easier to visualize if we just open up our dev server. So let's go ahead and do that. To do that, let's open up a new terminal window, and then we're going to make use of the Ionic CLI again. And this time we're going to run Ionic serve to start the dev server. And you can see under the hood, it is using the Vue CLI service to go ahead and start up our live reload server and serve all the files to the browser. So let's go ahead and do some window management here, go back to our editor, and we can check to see how this is working by coming up to our title and just renaming this something a little bit better. We'll do home, save the file, and then see that it's automatically been updated. Now, you may notice that we only have one header here, but we also have a second header being shown inside of our Ion content. We're not actually seeing where that header is. So how can we see that? Well, this is a perfect example of a component in Ionic that is specific to a certain platform. So if we were to come over here and say, select an iPhone user agent, we can see that second header being shown. And to prove that, let's go ahead and update this title to home. And then we can see that it's automatically been updated. This second header is making use of iOS's large collapsing header design paradigm that they introduced a few versions ago. And we can see how this works. If we were to delete all of this placeholder content, create a paragraph tag, inside of this, we're going to just render some placeholder content, and we'll make 50 of them, and then we'll save. If we come over to the browser, we can see that the header will scroll away as the content pushes the larger header out of view. So this is mimicking that design paradigm. It has all the bounce effects when you're on a mobile device, and it feels right at home for users. Let's go ahead and get rid of these paragraph tags. And instead of using that, we're going to make use of another Ionic component. And in this case, we're going to use ion item. And then we'll just say v for, we'll say item of, and we'll do an inline array of 0, 1, 2, 3. And then we'll just render item inside of the actual ion item component. We also need to make sure that we're adding our key, and we're just going to set this to item. And then we need to go ahead and import this component inside of our actual component in the defined component setup. So we have this component object over here. We're just going to add ion item. When we save, we'll have our items being rendered inside of the home component. We have 0, 1, 2, and 3. With the way our component is set up right now, it's not really doing anything special, just rendering. So what if we could have a URL or another component that we can navigate to pass in the items that we are rendering? To do this, we're going to create a new view. We're just going to go ahead and I will copy this. And instead of calling it home page, I'm just going to call it edit page for now. And then we're going to go ahead and actually add this to our router config. So we'll copy this object and then we'll paste it again and we'll update everything in here. We'll say this is going to be called edit. This will also become edit. And then instead of using a direct reference to the component itself, we'll make this a dynamic import where we can import from views, and then we'll go edit page.view. And then we're going to copy this again. And we're going to put in another slug here for a dynamic one. So we can navigate to edit either with no parameter or with a parameter. With this in place, let's go to our edit page and start to modify all of the content that we have here. We'll do a quick little bit of cleanup, renaming home to edit. Same thing down here. And then we'll get rid of this ion item, and we're just going to put in a paragraph tag saying the active item is, and then we'll have a little double curly here, and we'll put in item as the placeholder. We can then go ahead and come down to our script block, and we're going to add something new to our component definition, where we'll go ahead and say setup and start to use setup instead of the options API in our Vue component. With this, we have a nice new approach to getting data out from our component and into our template. All we have to do is have a return statement here, and we can start to add things to that return statement to make it available inside of our Vue component. So obviously we need to have a const item in here, and then this is going to be equal to a ref inside of Vue, which is our way of having some sort of local state. And then before this, we need to have a route instance, and we're going to use the use route function from Vue router to go ahead and get access to the route information for our component. Now, to get access for the route information, we're going to make use of an Ion lifecycle hook. And in this case, we're going to use the on Ion Vue did enter hook. And this is going to go ahead and fire every time the component has entered the view, but is done animating at the same time. It's a slight change from Vue's on mounted lifecycle hook, which only will fire when the component has been created. This one will coordinate things to happen as the animation completes. Inside of the Ion Vue did enter hook, we're going to create a variable called ID. And then this is going to be the value of root dot params.id, and we're going to cast this as a string for now. And then we'll set item.value to be the value of that ID. Now, the last thing we need to do is inside of our return statement, we need to return item, and this will make the variable accessible from our template. To be able to get this to actually show and link to this page, we're going to go to our homepage component. And then inside of our template, we're going to go ahead and create a new binding for a router link. And this is going to be set to the new URL of edit. And then we're going to append the item to our URL. Let's format this quickly. And then take a look at the route a little bit clearer. From here, we can go ahead and save. And then when we click on one of the items, we should be able to go navigate to the new edit page and see that the active item gets updated as soon as the animation has been completed. So everything you've learned about Vue Router can still be applied in an Ionic app. You just get the automatic benefit of having all those transitions and animations applied to your app without you having to set that up. Now let's change gears here and start to look at how we can start accessing native device features right from the browser and while using JavaScript. To do this, let's open up a new terminal window and let's install two new dependencies. First one we're going to install is this Vue Up Vue Quill for a little bit of a rich text editor. And then the second one we're going to install is this capacitor file system package, which is going to let us access the file system API right from our browser. We'll hit install, and when these are done, we can go back to our main project. Back in our main project, let's go down to our component, and we're going to add another line using setup again. And we're going to start planning out how we want to make use of the capacitor file system API. So in preparation for this, let's create a few new variables. First one that we're going to add is this const notes. And then this is going to equal a ref. And it will be set to an empty array for now. And then we're going to have another one called nope. And this is just going to be a arrow function that we'll use to handle a no-op function. So for our component, we're going to want to have two functions that are going to get called whenever the component becomes active. This first one is going to be called const make dir. It's going to be an async function. And then the second one is going to be readdir, and that is also going to be an async function. What we're going to do is inside of makedir, we're going to add a return, and then we're going to await file system dot makedir, and then we're going to pass in a path, which is essentially a prefix for where we want our makedir call to make. So in this case, we're just going to make a folder called notes, and then we're also going to need to set a directory at where this should be stored. So we're going to use this directory enum, and then we're going to select the documents directory where we should be making the notes directory. Let's go ahead and import these at the top of our component. So we're going to need to import ref for our notes, and then we're going to import from capacitor file system, and then we're going to import the file system API, the directory API, and then this other one called file info. Back down to our readdir function. We can start to fill this out by having a return statement, and then we're going to await the file system dot readdir, and then this is going to look pretty similar to the makedir. We'll pass in a path or the directory that we want to read, and then we're going to scope this to the directory dot documents folder. to make sure we're reading from a place that the operating system will let us. And then to call these two, we're going to create another function called init file system. And inside of here, we're going to start off by calling makedir and then a dot then. And then we're going to call noop for both the success and then the failure handler. Then we'll have a readdir call. And then we're going to get back some files. So we'll have our final callback. And inside of here, we're going to destructure real quick and get the files from our readdir. And then, not to bore you, to make sure that you're not going to see this being written, we're going to paste a quick little sorting algorithm to actually sort these by the date they were published. We have a TypeScript error, and then we can see file info array is not assignable to the type that our notes are set to. So let's fix that by going up to our notes variable and then setting the type to be a file info array. Now we're almost done with all of this, but we do need a way to call this init file system. And to make sure that we're getting the most recent files every time the home page becomes active, we're going to make use of the on Ion Vue did enter lifecycle hook, and we'll say async. It's going to be a function. We will await file system dot request permissions to get permissions to actually read the device's file system, and then we're going to call init file system. Now in our return statement, we can return the notes, and then we just need to update our template to use a new value for our v4. So for this, we'll have a note and then an index of notes, and then our key will now be the index, and then we will get rid of the router link for now, but instead of using the item in here, we'll have note.name. Now when we save, we'll lose all the items because we obviously don't have any notes saved to the file system. So let's go ahead and add in a way to add some notes and save them to a file system. So starting off, we're going to come up to the header at the top of our page, and we're going to add a component called Ion Buttons. Ion Buttons is a simple wrapper component that allows us to align a collection of buttons all across a horizontal axis. For this, we're going to add an Ion button. It is going to have a router link, and we're going to link to the edit page, and the text in here will just be add, and then we can hit save. Now our button has been added and is right above the header, the title and everything. So let's go ahead and control where that goes. And to do that, we're going to go to Ion Buttons, and we're going to set the slot to equal end. Now this is going to let the Ion buttons render all the way at the right side in a left to right context, and on the left side in a right to left, whatever that last letter is. So wherever a line of text should end, that's where the button should render. Now we're going to go back down to our component, and we're going to add Ion Buttons and Ion Button to the imports. And then we're going to also add them to our components object in the home page. From here, we can open up the edit page, and then we can start to modify this content that we have in here. For now, we can get rid of the Ion header and then this paragraph tag. Then down in our script block, we're going to add a new import statement from capacitor file system. And then we're also going to import from @ViewUp view quill. This is going to give us access to the quill editor component, which we can use to add some text to our app. We also need to make sure that we are including the CSS for Vue Quill to make sure that our editor looks correct. We can go ahead and add the Quill editor to our components entry. And then up in our template, let's add the editor as a child of our Ion content. And then we can add the V model content, which is going to let us have two-way binding between the content in the editor and then a ref inside of our component. And we're just going to call this content just to keep it simple. Before we save, let's go down to our component again, and inside of setup, we're going to reuse this item and we're going to rename it content. And then we're going to delete this on Ion Vue did enter lifecycle hook, as we won't be using it. We can rename the item in our return statement to be content. And then we can create a function called save, which will be an async function. And inside of this, we're going to create a variable called file. And to name our file, we're just going to use a pretty quick and dirty approach. Say note, and inside of this, we'll have date.now.txt. From there, we can call await, and we're going to import again the file system and call the function write file. Let's go ahead and import this from the file system API and start to fill out the parameters for our write file function call. To write a file, we're going to need to pass in a path, and that is going to be the directory where we want to save the file, in this case, notes. And then we're going to also pass in the file that we generated above. We need to also set some data, and that's going to be the content.value or an empty string. Then we need to set the directory scope. So we'll set directory, and that's going to be the directory enum.documents. And then we also need to set the encoding, and we can just use the encoding enum.utf8. Again, let's fix the importing. And then we're going to need a way to navigate back once this file has been written. So let's modify this route variable that we have up here to be router. And then instead of use route, we're going to use Ion router. This is going to give us access to all of Ionic's routing capabilities and let us be able to navigate back into our history. We can call our router by saying router.back. And then we can return the save function from our setup block. Now we can go back up to our template, and we're going to add some buttons in here to be able to call save. And then further on down, we'll make sure that we are actually importing them. So we can get rid of these two imports. Add Ion buttons, Ion button, and then add them to our components object. Now when we save, then we can go to our app, we can click add. We'll be brought to the edit page, which now has a new text editor. We can say hello from the demo, and then we can go ahead and click save, which will navigate us back and let us be able to see the note that we just wrote to the file system. So let's wrap things up and get back to the slides. Awesome. Now, we've just gone over the very basics of how to get started with Ionic and its open source stacks. What about these other pillars that Ionic tries to focus on? What about secure? Well, our secure platform involves three different aspects: Ionic authentication, storage, and biometrics. We like to refer to these as the security trifecta, which includes a whole flow of how you can authenticate securely, use biometric features to authenticate and authorize users, and then secure that information on your device using our secure storage offering. All of these combined together really are, a triple threat of how you can properly secure and authenticate your users inside of your app. For the Connect, we're going to look at how we can, utilize other different services that exist outside of Ionic. For example, say you wanted to use Couchbase Lite, Apple Pay, Google Pay, or whatever. We have gone through and created a bunch of different components and packages that you can integrate with your app to make sure that you can call these different services all from your TypeScript or your JavaScript. Really, there shouldn't be any more that you need to do. We can take care of a lot of this integration for you and make sure that you're just having to call the correct package. And now you can connect to Couchbase Lite or Apple Pay, what have you. And then the last of these pillars is the deliver. It's not enough that you have to build your app. What can we do to help you deliver this app to your users? And like I said, that includes our CI/CD service that we call AppFlow. Now, AppFlow is tailor-made specifically for mobile apps, and so it's going to feel familiar enough for folks who have used other more generic CI/CD tools, but offer a lot of functionality that is only going to be applicable to a mobile app. So you can go ahead, you can have your app get built on every single commit, but then go ahead and take that build and generate a native binary. That binary can be downloaded and shared in various different places like TestFlight or Google Beta, or you can go ahead and have that be deployed to your users through our deploy feature. All this together gives you a pretty awesome experience and a pretty seamless development experience from building your app to shipping it to your users. Now, closing out, we're inviting you all to just be a part of our community. We have a huge presence all over the world with tons of developer communities existing in, say, London, Amsterdam, or right here in the US. Join these meetup groups or join our developer community inside of the forum or Discord. Ask some questions on Stack Overflow or our forum, or if you're inclined to, answer some questions. We'd love to have people be involved in helping one another. So if you want to join our forum, you can check out forum.ionicframework.com. That'll be our main hub for asking and answering questions. If you want to join the Discord, you can check out this link right here. Discord will be our main chat platform where you can ask us and interact with the community in a pretty relaxed way. And then if you want to know more about Ionic, you can go ahead and check out ionic.io/docs, and that'll teach you everything that you need to know about the Ionic platform. So let's hand it over and start going over some questions.